welcome back. We are here with the Gory Hole episode 7. Thanks for your patience again on this one. I think I said it last week. We're just going to kind of pump these out whenever I have the time to do so. Girlfriend's in law school right now, and we kind of share this office, so, at times, law school does take precedence over ranting about horror films, believe it or not. That being said, we're here, and we're going to talk about some pretty solid films. I'm a pretty big fan of every movie that we're going to talk about today, so, talking about movies that I really enjoy. Got a little guest with us. You can kind of see his hands right there, but yeah, guys, they got me with the popcorn bucket this time. Look at that. Bam, bam. Other arm, bam. Unfortunately, the key is merely for display. Or at least I think so. If it started doing that on its own, I think that would mean I was in big trouble. But, we'll just, we'll leave our boy right there. Yes. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the film Red Rooms. It's going to be a French-Canadian horror adjacent. It has more of like a psychological thriller kind of vibe to it, but there's definitely some really, really disturbing imagery in it that kind of pushes it more into the horror territory. After that, we're going to talk about an insanely wild film called Dashcam. It's from the people that brought us the FaceTime horror film Host, which I thought, given its limited budget, was pretty effective. They definitely had more money to work with this time, and I think what astounds me the most with this movie is how just, and I guess there's multiple ways to take a movie. Like, I could be alone here, but I feel like I'm probably in the majority. The final girl, like the character that you're with the entire movie, is just absolutely insufferable. And it was an interesting choice because it starts to, like, she gets on your nerves the second she appears, and you're like, okay, I can't wait for this character to get it. But then they never do, and you're just with them the whole movie. It's like if the bully from Carrie never died and you were with her the whole movie, but she kept doing things to where you're like, oh, I can't wait for her to die. Like, it was crazy. And then we're going to talk about another French horror film, probably the best of the little trilogy here today, called Mads. This movie came out of nowhere like a fucking sucker punch for me. And I felt like by the time it ended, it felt like it went by because it was just super intense for the entire film. And I felt like it left me picking my teeth up off the floor. Like, it was just brutal, this movie. So yeah, Red Rooms, Dashcam, and Mads. This is the Gory Hole. Let's get to it. All right, y'all. But yeah, let's talk Red Rooms. All right, this one was getting a lot of buzz. Kept hearing about it on various different podcasts. Shout out to Horror Weekly. That's probably my go-to horror podcast. I guess that's the one I aspire to, since I'm just like just one guy, just, talking about horror movies, and that has a very similar setup. And I love how community-oriented it is. But yeah, he had recommended it, and then Scarecrow Video, where I rent a lot of these movies on hard copy, it was on their best of 2024 list, so I was like, all right, gotta do it. But the basic plot for Red Rooms follows our lead character, Kelly Ann, played by Juliette. I'm gonna mispronounce the name, so if you're watching this, Juliette, I apologize. Juliette Garepi? Yeah? All right. Juliette Garepi, and also a good supporting performance from Laurie Babin, who plays a character called Clementine. Essentially, the film follows a brutal murder or murders that has taken place, and you're kind of introduced to all the characters via the start of the trial. So the killer is already, in custody, on trial for basically murdering a series three girls. And it took place on like the dark web, essentially, and he was like selling these torture videos like for for Bitcoin essentially. And so he's kind of just like live streaming these in these like dark web chat rooms called the Red Rooms. And essentially, you kind of just follow the character of Kellyanne as she goes to the hearing and is honestly, you don't really know her motivation for a lot of the movie. She's just very just drawn in to the case itself, but you can't really tell. Like, for instance, Clementine, they meet at the trial. She's like a diehard groupie for the killer. The killer's name, pretty badass killer name, by the way, just sticks in your head. Ludwig Chevalier. I'm like, that's gonna stick in my mind. That was just a cool name. Sucks he had to be a serial killer. But it's funny, the killer doesn't actually get any. I mean, you see him plenty, but he's not really a character outside of just kind of like sitting. I don't think he has a line in the movie. You just kind of see him sitting on trial. Like, so the movie really is about how Kellyanne is kind of, following the trial. And like I was saying with Clementine, like she has very clear motivation. She's like a diehard groupie for this killer. So she's kind of showing up. She's, swears up and down. She's like, she knows he's innocent. And she's very vocal about it, which, I mean, the families of the victims are at the trial too, and they don't take very kindly to that. They aren't really big fans of Clementine. But as the movie progresses, you learn a little bit more about Kellyanne. She's a model, and she kind of dabbles in more like edgy kind of modeling. So it kind of is interesting that she is. It's almost as if she's putting this all like in jeopardy by going to this trial, this very public trial, and kind of putting herself in the spotlight, so to speak. And especially because she then starts to get roped in with Clementine, and then meaning that people are kind of assuming that she's there in support of this guy because they're like, why else would you be here? She's Kellyanne's very interesting character because it seems that outside of modeling, like she has this very, very nice apartment, great view of Montreal where the film takes place. And she makes a lot of her money like online gambling. There's a really funny scene where you kind of get an insight into both Clementine and Kellyanne's kind of like economic standing because they go in line for lunch in the courtroom, like while they're on break. And they both get their meals. They sit down, and then Clementine comments, she's like, wow, this is very expensive for the portions you get. Food's good, though. And then Kellyanne basically just goes, oh, yeah, don't worry about it. I've got lunch today. And she throws money on the table, and she's like, Clementine goes, oh, no, you don't need to do that. And then she goes, oh, don't worry. I just won us the amount of money it cost to to pay for lunch. And she flips her phone around, and she was, she was doing like online poker as they were sitting there and won their lunch money, right? So she is very just resourceful in that way. This is the vibe I get. Like she basically works for herself, This movie does a lot with colors that I like. I always have kind of like the red backdrop, and that kind of fits the the vibe of the film because in the way it plays with colors, like they call them the red rooms, and it feels very, very literal in a way because in a sense, like I feel like you would assume they call them the red rooms because of the amount of blood that's being displayed from the victims, but you don't really ever actually watch the videos. You watch the characters watch them in a way. So when they watch the videos, you kind of just hear the screams, and you'll get a few cuts to like the aftermath of it, but you don't ever actually see the video. But what does happen is whenever they hit play on the videos, their entire faces and their entire back of the room are illuminated in red, right? And it was really interesting because I watched this movie in like a pitch black room, and every time this happened, not only were their rooms illuminated red, but then at one point I noticed after the second or third time it happened, I'm like, well, my entire room is now illuminated red too because of the color of the television screen. So it's really interesting. You feel like you're like in the red rooms with the characters. And I thought that was really I don't know if that was just like an accident on their part, but it feels intentional, because it was just kind of surreal when I look around the room and I'm like, oh wow, I see what they're doing here. This is really, really cool. As the movie progresses, you come to find out that they only really have this Ludwig Chevalier guy on. They essentially, there was a clip in one of the videos where they see his eyes, but that's really all they have him on. They don't really have any part of his face, and that's why Clementine is like so like she's very, very, stuck in her ways, that she thinks this guy's innocent, because she's like, all they have to go on are his eyes. Like, that's not enough. And in a way, she has a point. I mean, especially because we don't see the videos, so you're like, how damning is this evidence, seeing as that we haven't seen it? And then you realize that the third victim there was no video for. Well, there is a video for it, but like no one has it. So that's when you kind of realize that Kellyanne's whole motivation, it almost feels like she wants to like solve the case before the cops or the the lawyers, or whatever. Like, she wants to be like one step ahead of them, because she is very in tune with the dark web, as you come to find out throughout the movie. And once you get the bit of information that there's a missing tape, then it all starts to kind of make sense. She's very clearly hunting for the tape. Like, she wants to find it and watch it, before everyone else. Or it almost feels like commentary on like modern day obsession of like true crime. Like, she's obsessed with these killings. She doesn't seem to have any sympathy for the guy on the stand. It's not like she thinks he's innocent. It's almost like she wants to be involved in the case. Like, she wants to be involved in a way that, 10 years from now, when they're talking about it on a podcast, her name comes up as the person who, gave them the tape. Or at least that's the vibe I got. You get a really, really interesting sequence where she goes to the courtroom, and she has snuck in like an attire that is almost identical to that of the victim who's in the missing tape. And so she goes in, and the killer basically has a thing for women with like blue eyes, blonde hair type thing. So she goes into the courtroom, and then she sits down, and then you see her, she puts a blonde wig on, and then you see her put in contacts. She looks up, you realize they're blue, and then she takes off her overcoat, and it reveals she's in a schoolgirl uniform, exactly like the victim. And then it's almost like she wants to get a rise out of the killer. And this is really the only point of the movie where you see any sort of reaction from Ludwig. The rest of the courtroom starts to slowly notice what she's doing. Like, the parents look over and, start tapping each other on the shoulder, pointing at her. I mean, she goes all out. She goes all in as to put in like a fake set of braces to match the victim completely. And then she starts getting dragged out of the courtroom, and she starts like fighting them and making a scene. And then that's when the killer looks directly in her eyes. Tense music starts playing. And, he gives her a little wave. That's all you get from him, from the whole movie. But I feel like at that point, you still don't really know if he did it. The movie seems to kind of keep that, for the end for you to find out. So, but I don't know. When he did that creepy wave, I was like, this guy did that shit. Why would you do that on stand? It was, it was almost like when Ben Affleck smiles in the picture in Gone Girl, and then everyone's like, oh, this guy did that shit. Like, rightfully so, right? That was a stupid thing for that character to do. And I kind of feel the same for Ludwig. If he didn't want to feel incriminated, that little wave, everyone would have saw that, and they've been like, that was fucking weird. He just waved creepily at a girl dressed like his victims. That's not a good look, Ludwig. I thought that was funny. But After that stunt, Kellyanne gets a call from her agent. She's essentially lost all her modeling gigs, and she's essentially, you see her playing poker throughout the whole movie. I mean, that scene was essentially her going all in on this case. It has taken over her life, right? So it kind of feels like the poker thing kind of has like a narrative aspect to it as well in that sense. But after this, she kind of, goes off the deep end and just becomes enthralled in, the case. She starts going on to all these back rooms and like trying to basically enter bidding wars in the red rooms to get the missing tape. And you get this really tense sequence of her, she's got this dual monitor set up while she's playing the poker, and she's playing a poker game to actively earn the Bitcoin that she needs on her other monitor. She's actively bidding against, right? So you see her placing bids, and the bids keep going higher, and then you see her playing poker on the other screen, and at a certain point she doesn't have the funds for what she's betting, right? Like she's getting outbid, but she's like having to play hands to then make up for the Bitcoin, and then she'll place another bid, and it's like a really tense sequence because there's a lot of, there's a couple times when a guy will place a bid, and then you'll see them commenting in the chat thread, like going once, going twice, and then enough money for her to place the next bid comes through from the poker match, and she'll like place the bid like in the last second. It was a really good scene. And then she's able to get the tape, but by doing that, you notice after she buys the tape, she spends 21.5 Bitcoin on it. And then when she does that, I remember looking, I'm like, wait, that was all her money. That's how she pays for this apartment. That was her that was all of her money that she just spent on this tape, which is crazy. Cause like, it's like, sure, you have the tape now, but now you literally have no money. You just got fired from your job. Like her lifestyle, like it's crazy to see the lengths that she's willing to go and what she's willing to put at risk just to get this tape. And then she gets the tape. You see her watch it again. With her watching it, where you just watch her watch it, you don't really see. And then you see her go to the parents' house of the victim, of the girl on the tape, and she sneaks into their house and leaves them the flash drive of the tape. But then there's a really creepy sequence. Again, like this would seem like Good Samaritan work were it not for a few really odd sequences. One being the courtroom sequence, where she dresses up like the daughter in front of the guy and in front of her family. Like that feels, that just feels really mean to the family. And almost like it's a game to her, like poker. And when she drops the flash drive, you're like, oh, she's giving it to the family. She's giving them closure. But then she goes into the girl's bedroom, and she's still dressed at this point like the character. And there's this really creepy sequence of her sitting on the girl's bed and just like taking selfies of herself. And I really like the use of the camera flash in this scene, because when she's holding the camera in front of herself, you see like really blank face in the dark, and then as the flash goes, you see just a really fake wide smile. The camera will take a picture, and then her face goes back to blank, right? And then she's like takes another picture, repeats. She takes like 3 pictures until she gets like what I imagine she thinks is like the good selfie, and then she leaves. That's kind of the end of the movie at this point. The tape ends up having the damning evidence that they need to convict Ludwig, so he promptly pleads guilty once they, find the tape. So she essentially solved the case, right? She was a big help, but the amount that she lost to do it almost makes you, it leaves like a bittersweet taste in your mouth, because justice was served, but then you have this character that's kind of just left in shambles because of it. And the movie kind of ends, and you don't really get any sort of emotional kind of like check-in with how she's feeling about it. is she still in shock? Like, she realizes that she did it, but it seems like by time the movie ends pretty briefly after this, that, like, I wonder after it all set in for Kellyanne, she'd be like, oh fuck, how am I going to pay my rent? Like, I kind of ruined my reputation for modeling. Like, not only did I get fired, I kind of burned my bridges. Who's going to want to do business with me with how I acted in this very public murder trial? The relationship with technology in this movie feels very, very reminiscent of not the style of Videodrome, but it almost feels like what Videodrome was warning of the future. And David Cronenberg films have a really good way of doing that. Albeit while his movies end up being a little more cartoonish than how the futures actually play out, with a lot more gross body horror than actually happens in real life. There's just some key things in Videodrome that kept popping up as I watched Red Rooms. One being when forget the character's name, but he's the character in Videodrome that he only lives on VHS tapes, and he's basically giving knowledge to James Woods' character about Videodrome. But when he has a note about the future in that movie, he says, in the future, our names won't matter. We'll have digital names that are more important than our real name. And that scene just kept coming back to me when she was going through all these dark web chat rooms, like the cryptic view of the future and how we're all going to be so ingrained in our technology. And then you have these chat rooms with all of these fake names popping up, but they are honestly, they feel more important than the real names in that sense. So that's something that kept coming up. And then also just like the general plot of Videodrome is about, James Woods' character is trying to find, the most shocking things that he can air to get more eyes on his, television station. And in Red Rooms, the amount of people that are willing to, not just the people who are trying to find the tapes after the trial's on, but the little bit about how the killer not only was killing them, but he was live streaming it into chat rooms that people were actively tapping into. I mean, those people didn't kill anyone, but in my eyes, they are not, I don't know if I would say just as wrong, but they're up there with the killer. Like, they're logging in to watch him do all this heinous shit to 13-year-old girls, and they're not saying a word to the cops. They're just watching it, right? And that feels very Videodrome, right? Like, after you keep trying to satiate this bloodlust, this need to watch all these horrendous, fucked up, shocking things, and you're always on a quest for the next most fucked up thing that you can watch. At what point do you just start seeking out real murder? I know I wouldn't, but I think there's people out there that would, and that's a very scary thing that I feel like makes this movie so effective, is because it's so believable. I could totally believe that murders are being broadcasted into live chat rooms with a bunch of freaks paying to watch it. I could believe that. It's probably happening. I would not be surprised. But yeah, that's Red Rooms. Again, this is a movie I'm going to need to watch a lot to fully pick up on what is happening. They play a lot with colors. I feel like the uses of red is something that I picked up on, but there's a lot of blue in the movie that I feel like probably has meaning as well, and I'll probably pick up on that as I continue to watch it. It's not going to be the most eventful, slaughter fest, splatter film. It's not gonna, be what the people who want another Terrifier are looking for. This is a lot more slow burn. But for people who like more like slow burn, psychological, and I mean the scenes where they're watching the videos, it's honestly really effective, like how disturbing it is when you just see the reactions of the characters, especially when Kellyanne and Clementine are both watching the murder videos. It's really interesting to see their very different reactions to the video. There's a really interesting sequence where you just see Clementine, like, tears beating down her face, and Kellyanne, it looks like it's not even phasing her. It's just very interesting. It says a lot about their characters in that moment, like who they are based on their reactions to just true shocking violence. And when the lawyer or the prosecutor is describing the murders in the opening scene, that's also very effective. It kind of hurts when she mentions that he slices their eyeballs in half with an X-Acto knife. You don't have to see that. The way she delivers that line, your eyes start hurting. You're like, ooh, ow. So yeah, definitely check it out. Again, it's not going to be for, people looking for Splatterfest, but I think late at night, pitch black room, this is something that could get under your skin. So Red Rooms gets the go ahead from me, and it gets the go ahead from Monkey. On to the next film. But yeah, so next up we have Dashcam, and I watched this back to back with Red Rooms, and it was good to have, because Red Rooms is a very depressing movie, I'll be honest. And Dashcam is just so much fun. I feel like you need to go into it knowing that the first like 10 to 15 minutes, and again, this is just how it was for me, but the first 10 to 15 minutes, this lead character is going to be nails on chalkboard annoying. She's terrible. But for me, I then realized what they were doing, in that it almost felt like they were like, what if we took the worst character in a horror movie? Like the character that shows up and starts saying and doing things that make the audience go, oh, this girl's not going to make it very long. I can't wait to see this character bite it. Like, she is a terrible character, but she plays it so well that it's just playing on the emotions of the audience. It's like increasing our bloodlust, right? Like, oh, she's going to get it. This isn't the kind of character that makes it out. She's, not a nice person. She's absolutely terrible, rude to everyone. Like, this is the character that gets it in the worst way, and we all cheer, right? But this is the final girl. That's the thing. And I looked, I mean, I know, like, I tried to find other movies that made such an insufferable, annoying character their lead and made her make it to the end and be the final girl. And for the life of me, I can't think of another movie that's done this, because it seems crazy, right? To make your lead character insufferable. That just, on paper, that's a math problem that just, it doesn't have an answer, right? It doesn't seem like it would work. But it's so funny because it goes from annoying to when it keeps going and she just keeps getting thrown into more set pieces to where you think it's finally going to happen and it doesn't. She keeps making it out and you keep having to deal with this character. You just can't help but laugh, or at least I couldn't. But let's talk plot, right? So Dashcam follows Annie Hardy, who is playing herself, by the way. We'll get to that later. That was crazy for me to get that realization. We'll cover that at the end. We'll circle back. So Annie Hardy is our lead character, and her claim to fame in the film is that she runs the only live improv music show filmed in a moving car. So she'll be driving, she'll have a dash cam, and she'll essentially be playing, play a beat on her keyboard, and she'll have people commenting on the live stream that she's doing, and they'll comment words, and she'll work them into like these rap songs. And the songs are, I mean, it's borderline like early 2000s John LaJoie, like show me your genitals type shit, like very just like vulgar and just like talking about genitalia. That seems to be what her improv just seems to be taking people's words and working them into sex acts. But it's kind of funny, right? And then you realize this movie is set like in COVID, like when the outbreak first happened and lockdowns were being placed. Everyone is wearing masks, and then the character starts going on and on and on about how she doesn't want to wear masks and everyone's a sheep, and then you catch her with the MAGA hat on while she's packing her clothes, and then you realize, oh no, this girl's a Trumper. I didn't know if I wanted to talk about this on the podcast because there's a lot going on in the world politically, and I kind of, I have my opinions, and I kind of wanted this to just be like an escape from that. I didn't really want this to be a place where you had to worry about hearing about the state of the world, because movies are an escape from that. But this film is so entrenched in political rhetoric that I feel like it's going to be impossible. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep my views as nice and respectable as I can, because that's not what we're here for to talk about. But I am not a Trump supporter. So personally, I found her caricature to be just like a little bit too spot on. Like, it was like, the way she acts and talks, like, it takes me back to, I live out in Seattle. I go home for Thanksgiving pretty consistently in Georgia, where I'm from. And I don't know, she just reminds me of the people I inevitably have to deal with every time I go back for Thanksgiving. And it's it's scary how accurate that she plays this character type, right? And I mean, she's going into businesses and they're telling her to put a mask on, and she's screaming at them, and like doing all the worst kinds of videos that you would see of people doing to our innocent service workers during that horrible, horrible time. To the point where I think this movie is going to be great like 10, 15 years from now. It's going to be like, it honestly does a great job of capturing how that all was. I feel like the Kevin Williamson, I think he wrote, and I don't think he directed it, but maybe he did, that movie Sick that came out. I think it was maybe a Hulu original, and that took place in COVID. But I feel like this movie feels more true to the COVID experience. So I feel like 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be a great time capsule film to remind us all like how it was. But she essentially live streams herself packing a bag and flying to England. There's a great sequence where she's going through the airport and she has a mask, but the mask says "you're all sheep" or something to that effect on it, which is kind of funny. And then she's flying to London, and then you realize she's breaking into her friend's house, who you come to find out doesn't even realize that she was coming, and scares the shit out of him. And then like his wife is there too, and they think they're being robbed, but then it's like, oh, it's just my friend Annie. And you've come to find out that this guy Stretch, whose house she broke into, she flew to England, by the way, from America, and she came to visit him, and they're making content together. But her Stretch's wife and Stretch as well, you come to find, they're taking the lockdown pretty seriously. So they, are not super pumped about Annie just kind of like dropping in, right? But she drops in anyway, and there's a funny sequence of her the next morning in the kitchen, and like Stretch's wife is in the kitchen and she's wearing a mask around her, and like, Annie keeps trying to come up to her, and she goes, "Oh, do you mind like keeping the 6 feet? We're trying to do the social distancing thing." And she's like, "I mean, I'm already in your house." And she's like, "Yeah, I didn't really want you here." Like, so it's like a really awkward thing. But then Annie then starts like singing a song that's like actively about how she's believing the lies of the government, like in her, like you can see it on the woman's face that she's just like, "Get this fucking woman out of my house." It's crazy to me that this is the main character. I'm gonna say that over and over again. Like I can't believe it worked. It worked for me. But yeah. So as the movie progresses, you get some sequences with her and Stretch. Like she's driving around with him. They're making content in the car, making songs and stuff like that. But she's riding along with Stretch he's doing like Uber Eats, DoorDash type stuff to make some money on the side, because he was laid off because of the COVID shutdown. And, you get another sequence with Annie walking in onto, with him to pick up a delivery, and the guy in the store is like, "Ma'am, you need to put a mask on." And she's like, "I am wearing a mask, actually. It's the new technology of mask where you actually can't see that I'm wearing one, but there's a mask here." And he's just like, he does this really long sigh that I'm a service worker. I don't know if I've ever talked about what I do on this podcast, but I'm just a bud tender. I work at a dispensary in Seattle. You wouldn't think selling weed is a stressful job. Um, it's still customer service. You still deal with those people. If there's any waiters watching this, those people that, either they never tip, they're, really bad manners, all those same people, some of them like to smoke weed, and they also make my job a living hell too. Um, had a guy try to return an eighth the other day, say he didn't like it. He smoked half of it. Must sound insane to a lot of you people, because it is. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here. But that worker, that sigh that he does when she does the whole mask bit, I felt it in my soul because I've done that sigh before. And it's like, look, I'm not even trying to argue the validity of masks, but during that whole thing, like, I am at risk of losing my job if I let people walk in and not wear a mask, right? So that he might not even care if you're actually wearing a mask or not, but that is his livelihood. And it's just like, he's like, look, man, I wouldn't be telling you to wear a mask if I wasn't being told. All right, just do it, right? And it elevates into this screaming match, right, of her and the guy. The guy's like, get the fuck out of my store. And like, it's just crazy to me because she is literally doing this to her friend Stretch while he's on the job trying to pick up food. So not only is she causing service workers, like, you know she's causing them like all this stress, but she's also putting her friend's job in jeopardy for this whole bit, right? So it's like she just legitimately does not care about anyone other than herself. And that is when, like, her and Stretch, he's kind of like, you have to leave. They go back to the house, and like the wife starts screaming at him or at her, and then she steals Stretch's car and and just drives away, right? And Stretch's phone is in the car, all this stuff. Stretch, starts calling her from his wife's phone, and he's like, bring my fucking car back. She hangs up on him and just starts strolling around in his car, live stream still going. You might be asking yourself, when does this fucking turn into a horror movie? Don't worry, it's coming. So then she gets a notice on his phone, be like, oh, looks like someone's trying to order some food. So she starts accepting deliveries under Stretch's account and starts going to pick them up. But the first place she goes to ends up actually being closed. And then she goes in, it's totally empty. And then she starts like going through the kitchen and rummaging through and like starts like trying to like eat food and like eating all the, like, she opens a jar of eggs and just starts eating food in the back of this empty kitchen. The owner comes out and is like, what are you doing here? And she's like, oh, I'm picking up an order. And then I guess like the lady just forgot to shut off the iPad, so like the order should have never gone through anyway. But then she's like, wait, since you're already here, you're an Uber driver, yeah? And then she's just like, yeah. And she was like, so I have a person in the back. Do you think you could drive them to this address? And she just agrees, right? So she goes into the back, and this old woman gets walked out to her, who doesn't seem to know where she is. She just seems to be in like a gown, and she just is like not there, right? And so she essentially ends up with this woman in the back seat of her car, and it's like, what are we doing here? So she starts driving this woman to this, location that she was given, and that is when the movie starts to get a little crazy. So the woman in the back of the car, first she just, she just shits herself, right? And that's when you're like, oh, this woman is, not there. Something's wrong with her. She's shitting all over the back of her friend's car. And then it turns out that she has this sort of like superhuman strength, and you might think she's a demon at one point. She like opens her mouth and you see these like tentacles in the back. Like, there's some weird shit going on with this woman that's now just in, kind of hunting Annie down for the rest of this film. And I mean, Stretch eventually catches up to her, and then now they're both being chased by this demon lady. And then you get some really, really terrific scenes of violence that come from this. I mean, there's a really good scene where the woman who initially handed this lady off to Annie catches up with her and, starts attacking them. And then she sticks her arm, through the driver side door and then kind of accidentally like shoves it through the steering wheel. And Annie takes it and twists it and her forearm snaps and blood starts spewing out of her forearm. It's fucking crazy. There's a really good sequence when this demon lady is attacking Annie in the back of the car, and Annie like takes out like a headrest and just starts stabbing her in the head with the metal prongs, and you get some nice brain splatter and everything. But it seems like no matter what she's doing to this lady, it's not killing her, because there's a lot of sequences where you're like, oh, that lady's dead now, right? And then she just keeps coming back. Turns out it seems to be some cult thing, because as the movie goes along, the people she was supposed to drive this lady to get involved, and more people end up chasing them. There's a really funny sequence where the demon lady has come back for the fourth, fifth time, and Annie is fighting her in the back seat, ends up getting like her wrapped up in the seat belts and buckled in, and then there's just this cut to where she's like just sitting back and smoking a cigarette. Music's playing on the car stereo, and there's just this demon writhing in the back, and she's just sitting all relaxed, puffing a cigarette. And I mean, you just can't help but laugh. I mean, there's a certain point in this movie where the character kind of becomes a little endearing, but then she'll start saying shit again. Like they're like, "Oh fuck, that's right, this person sucks." But it's really funny, like as she's running from all these crazy sequences, like she'll just be saying like the most random, she's like, oh fuck my ass, shit on my cunt, just the weirdest, most vile phrases. She is certainly a character. But yeah, the movie kind of ends after she takes out the demon lady, and Annie survives. Stretch doesn't, funny enough. That guy didn't do anything wrong. He was just living his life, asleep in bed, and then Annie came over, and guess what? She got her friend killed. It's kind of interesting how that works, right? I think that's funny. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but I thought it was funny that, a lot of the time through COVID, the thing was that people were like, I don't want to wear a mask, I'm fine. And it's like, yeah, you might be fine. It's who you could get. It's not just about you, right? And I think it's funny, like, she's like, I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. And then it ends up, yeah, you didn't need to do that. Look, you're fine. But look, now your friend is dead, I don't know if that if that was like a narrative structure that they were going for, but I don't know, something I pick up on, I guess. But yeah, so I did say I wanted to circle back to this Annie Hardy character. Throughout the whole movie, I was like, man, I've never seen this actor in anything. She's playing this role so well. Like, she does give a great performance. And then I decided to look her up, and that's when I realized that she is legitimately just playing herself. And that's interesting to me, because the movie seems to very clearly, that's why I would love to hear feedback on this from maybe someone who is a Trump supporter on the other side, and maybe what they take away from it, because it feels like that movie is making fun of you. And I don't know if that's just because of my bias, but when I looked her up and found out that she actually was a Trump supporter, and that it turns out that a lot of the views that she's spouting in this movie, she actually legitimately agrees with a lot of what she's saying. It struck me as odd, because the movie seems to be making fun of her the whole time. And I'm just like, was she not in on the joke? Did she not care? Like, it was interesting. Like, finding out that this was a real person, and not only that, but that she's exactly like how she acts in this movie, that was that makes this movie so much more insane to me. I don't understand how this all came together. This movie is going to outright just outrage a lot of people, not because of like offend them. I don't think it would do that. I just don't think many people could get past how just abrasively annoying Annie Hardy is in this movie. But for me, after I pushed through and kind of like saw that they were just going to keep building it and making it more absurd how much you could hate this character, I kind of thought it was fucking hilarious. I found myself laughing. The effects are really good. You get some genuine, pretty creepy scares. There's a sequence when Stretch and Annie are arguing outside of the car, and they just leave this woman in the back seat, and the live stream is still going on the dash cam. And as the cars are passing on the side, their headlights briefly obstruct the dash cam with really bright light as they pass. And so at first you're like, lights come and then the lady's still there. And then lights come and the lady's still there. They do it a couple times and then you're like, oh fuck, I see what they're doing. And then they do it again and she's not there. And I'm like, oh, that was like really effective for me. So yeah, I don't honestly normally like found footage movies in terms of like their structure. I really enjoy like the marketing aspects of them, like how Blair Witch and Paranormal, movies like that managed to make an entire generation of people think that they were actually real. Like I think that's really impressive from a marketing standpoint. But I don't know, just some of them seem very like by the books, very slow burn for the first hour and 15, the last 15 minutes to 30 minutes. That's when all the shit happens. Like it's a lot of, I've seen this before, but this movie managed to be consistently balls to the wall nuts from about 15 minutes in to the very end. And so it just kept me really engaged. And it's crazy what they were able to accomplish with that limited film structure and still deliver really killer effects and just like, really visceral violence. This one is definitely going to be one that has a lot of gore in it. So if you can get past some of these really fucking terrible characters, it's very worth it. But yeah, check it out. If you've watched this movie and you by chance are a Red Hatter, maybe let me know how your takeaway was from it, because I'm very curious if you feel like the movie was making fun of you, because I felt like it was. But yeah, so I think that's it for Dashcam. Next up, we're going to talk about Mads, and that was my favorite one, so I'm very excited to talk about that. But yeah, let's talk Mads. All right, y'all, time for the final movie of the episode. And like I've said, I think a couple times, it was my favorite. This one is Mads. So I don't know if I had recognized the film director. I want to see if I can find it. Directed by David Murrow. I don't see... Well, he directed a movie... Oh, he directed The Eye, according to IMDb, with Jessica Alba, which is interesting because that's, not the best movie, but all right, I'm getting sidetracked because Mads is fantastic. But Mads, for me, would be like if The Crazies, you can take either version, the Romero or the remake, just the basic kind of like, outbreak plot line. And if you kind of crossed it with the one-take war film 1917 that came out a few years back, and you kind of crossed them, they had a baby, it would be Mads. Because essentially the movie follows character Roman, is who we start the movie with. And he is at his drug dealer's house. You get from their dialogue back and forth that he's just graduated and that it's also his birthday. And they're doing drugs, and then his dealer gives him this new drug that he takes, and then that's when the movie kind of gets going. After he takes the drug, he leaves his dealer's house. He's going to a party tonight, right? And so he starts driving down the road, and camera's just following him. And like 1917, this movie is all one take. Obviously, they're probably doing some editing tricks to make it just seem like one take. I'm sure there's actual cuts in the movie, but the whole thing is presented like one continuous shot. And that doesn't always work for me. I feel like people are trying to latch onto that gimmick and try to attain some of the success of films like 1917 and like, Birdman, and Bear had the one take episode, and you know uh, that Extraction with Chris Hemsworth has those multiple one take sequences. I think that movie Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron has the one take sequence. It seems like people are starting to use that gimmick a lot more, and they're not always successful. But here it aids the chaos of this movie so well. So essentially, as Roman's driving down the road, he has a cigarette that he drops on himself and he pulls over to kind of like put it out. And then that is when a random ass woman just jumps into his car. She's got bandages all over her face. She's screaming. He doesn't understand what she's saying. And he can tell she's in distress, so that he starts freaking out, and then he calls the cops, and then, or he tries to call the paramedics, but then they are like, we're going to send officers to your location, and he starts freaking out because he's fucking super duper high, should not be driving. He will get arrested, right? So then he's like, I'm just going to drive this woman to the hospital myself. He hangs up on the cops. And so the whole time as he's driving, this woman's like grabbing at the steering wheel, trying to tell him something, like, speak to him, and he's just not getting it. And then she pulls out this like weird recorder, and then she starts playing this recording tape that's playing out loud, and we hear what sound like these doctors on the other end discussing this virus. Now for us, the viewer, we're probably like, oh, this is her they're talking about. She has a virus. She's trying to warn this guy, like, of what's happening, and probably trying to warn him of what's to come. But he's just in his own world. He's trying to get her to the police station, or I'm sorry, the hospital. And then that is when, at a certain point, she grabs, I think it's like a pair of scissors or something out of the glove box. I don't know. She starts stabbing herself in the neck, just stabbing herself. Blood's going everywhere. He's like, screaming at her to stop. And then she essentially just stabs herself to death, presumably. We'll get to that later. And just, he's covered in blood, right? And then so he's like driving to the hospital, but then you kind of see him make this visual realization that like he's covered in blood. This woman's stabbed to death. He's going to bring her to the hospital high as a kite and say she stabbed herself. To be honest, that would probably work given the trajectory of the stabs. Maybe I watched too much TV, but I feel like once they studied what the stab wounds were, they could deduce that she probably did stab herself. But maybe I'm just been watching too much CSI. I don't know. But I get it. He was high. He was worried. So instead, he just drives home. He drives home. He parks the car. And then you get the sequence where he basically parks the car, he gets out of the car, he goes downstairs, and then he starts showering himself, all the blood off of himself. And then that's when he goes back upstairs, he goes back to the car, and the girl's gone. Girl's gone. And not only that, it's almost like he doesn't see any evidence that she was ever there or something. Like, it just seemed like it wasn't as messy as it should have been. And that's when it feels like the movie's trying to play with you a little bit. Is what just happened? Did that actually happen? Was he really high, and did he hallucinate it with this new drug that his dealer gave him? So then you're kind of like unreliable narrator. Like, am I seeing what is actually happening type stuff? And then Roman's girlfriend then knocks on the door. And then I'm like terrible with names. I apologize, y'all, but I feel like we'll need this for the So that is when his girlfriend knocks on the door. I believe it's Julia, and so she basically is there. I'm sorry, it was Anise. Yeah, so Anise knocks on the door, and then he lets her in, and he is all out of whack. Obviously, she's trying to like embrace him, kiss on him, all this stuff, And she's like, oh, we're going to the party tonight. And that's when he's like, oh, I don't want to go. And she's like, starts like berating him, like, no, we need to go. And then they start doing lines together, all this stuff. He brings up, the new drug, right? And then she takes it. And then they all go out to this party. And while they're at the party, that's when you first start to notice that something's wrong with Roman. It's very slight at first. He keeps cracking his neck. And as he keeps doing it, like, they get louder and more like, and he starts like fidgeting. And then when he's in the party, he keeps going in and out of shadows, and you see his eyes are glowing in the shadows, and you're like, oh, what's going on there? And you get some interesting sequences at the party that kind of basically deduce and tell you like something's wrong with him. And then that is when there's a sequence when Julia, the character I mistaked Anise for earlier, she enters, and her and Julia and Anise, they're doing the same drug as well. So that's crucial that because these are the three focal characters of the film, they've all taken this drug, right? So now all their narration, right? All the things we see happen to them, we are now questioning at this point. Is it actually happening? And then Roman gets into a fight at the party when he's trying to leave. He ends up busting a guy's jaw. He tries to leave because his dad calls him and is like, because he's staying at, his dad's house, essentially, in the town where he goes to college. And his dad's like, what's going on? The alarm's going off. And he's like, I'm looking at the footage. There's someone in the house. And that's when you're like, oh, fuck. So maybe that girl in the car was real, and now she's walking around his house. So then you get this really intense sequence again, because it's all one take. It's been continuous this whole time. And he is riding back on a bicycle while he's on the phone with the alarm company. And they're like, okay, sir, what's your code? And he tells them, and then he's like, okay, can you shut it off? And they're like, no, you have to type the code into the panel, sir. And he's like, okay, cool. And they're like, all right, are you going to do it? And he's like, yes, I'm going to do it. But he's on a bike trying to race home, right? He's not in front of the panel. And the lady keeps going, sir, if you're not in front of the panel, I have to dispatch police. And he's like, no police, I'm there. And then they keep putting him on hold, and like 30 seconds will go by. The lady will come back, like, sir, you still haven't entered the code. Like, do I need to send the police? And so it's this like rising tension thing where it's like, he's like, they can't send the police because then they're going to find this fucking woman and I'm going to go to jail and prison. And so you're like really like racing with him at this point. They're like, all right, come on, get home. He makes it just in the nick of time, turns off the alarm, right? And then everything's fine. And then that is when he is walking around the house trying to find the woman, and then he finds her, and then that's when, by the time he finds her, she is full on like crawling on the ground like a fucking animal, dude. Like, she is completely not there. If you thought she was not there before, now she looks almost like a different creature the way that she's acting. And then that's when knocks on the door, and he looks out the window and sees that there's all these people in hazmat suits with rifles outside. And then they essentially, they break in, and they start shooting at the woman, and then they take Roman into their car. And then that's when they're in the car with Roman, and the camera is just following this truck as it's driving away, right? And then you hear like him writhing and doing all this stuff, almost like you from what you hear in the van, because the camera's outside following the van, so you really are only going on sound. It sounds like he's turning into whatever that woman was that they had just killed. And then you hear gunshots and it stops, and you're like, okay, Roman's been shot, he's dead. And the car keeps driving, and then that is when Anise comes into frame. She walks into the road, the car almost hits her, and then she just like flicks him off and then keeps walking, and then the camera's following her. And then, she because Roman, I guess I skipped a part, his nose was bleeding at the party, and then he took his nose blood and then like rubbed it on her, which is crucial, as we'll find out later. And so she's walking, right? And as the camera's following her, she's trying to call Roman. He's not answering. We know he's not gonna answer. And then that is when you know, you see her do the neck crack. And then, the movies kind of set it up at this point because now you see her going through what we already saw Roman go through. And you're like, oh no, she's got it too. And then so she's doing, the whole neck crack thing. We're following her essentially for, the next little bit of the movie. And we get to watch her descent into just complete madness. She is, going crazy, running through the streets, and she attacks this guy and like steals his bike. When she does it, she's almost demonic, but then as she's on the bike, she kind of snaps back into herself and starts apologizing for it. She's going, and then she finally just like starts collapsing and writhing on the ground. Enter Julia. Julia pulls up, after, getting her location by calling her on the phone, and she's like, so Julia pulls up, and that is when she gets Anise on the back of her like Vespa that she's pulled up on, and they start driving, down the road. Julia's gonna try and get to her mom's apartment building because her mom is now calling her saying that something's going on. She's hearing gunshots. And this is probably one of my favorite camera sequences of the movie, but the sequence of them on the Vespa, and you've got Julia riding, and you just see Anise behind her just like turning into the demon. Like she's like biting and like got this demonic smile, and her eyes, they just get more decrepit and glowy, and she keeps snapping her neck, and she starts like grabbing on Julia, and eventually Julia has to like get her off the bike, and then she starts writhing again on the ground, and Julia is like, basically you see Julia come to the conclusion visually, like in her face, she realizes like, I don't think I can save her, like she's too far gone. And then so she gets on the bike and she's like, I have to go save my mom. So she gets in very like, all right, I have to get to my mom mode. So she starts to drive away. And that's when you hear Anise start screaming, Julia, don't leave me. And then she's like, Julia, please don't leave me. And then she screams out, Julia, I'm going to eat your fucking face. And the line delivery. I like Julia ends up being the final girl. She's the last person that we stick with. But I think it says Lori Pavey, the girl who plays Anise, who then becomes for the rest of this part of the movie like the big threat because she just is following Julia. She goes off. That performance that she gives is absolutely insane. It feels very much like the lead actress's performance in Possession with Sam Neill. I forget the other woman's name. I should know her name too. I apologize. But yeah, it feels very in line with that. It's just very frantic, very emotional, very dramatic. It's a very intense performance. Julia makes it to the apartment building, and then that is when we get a very terrifying high-rise sequence that feels very in line with the most recent Evil Dead film. She gets stuck in the elevator, and then that's when you just hear all this mayhem going on behind her. She eventually is able to get out of the elevator, and she then runs into, this person in a hazmat suit who holds her up, and you think that this is kind of it, that she's going to get shot to death and that it's kind of over. But then takes off the helmet. She revealed to be a woman, and she essentially is like, you need to listen to me. And she's like, there's been an outbreak, like, you need to go now. And she's like, hands her the gun. A very crucial thing happened first here is that Julia was being attacked and this person saved her. But then it's revealed that she she was gashed, with the blood on the hands. And then that's, the through line, right? If you get their blood on, like, in you, like, not on you, but like in your mouth, eyes, anything like that, you're fucked. And then she basically hands her the gun, explains to her the rules, is like, this is what's been happening. And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of movies would give you the rules sort of towards the beginning and then set your characters off. But this movie gives you the rules. This is like the final scene. It gives you the rules right at the end. It kind of explains everything that you've been going through. But I kind of like that because it makes the movie so much more unpredictable, because there's a big portion of it where you think they might just be high. But then it's like, turns out like, no, that kid just happened to be high, and then he ran into someone carrying a virus and got her blood all over him. So it wasn't the drug he took that was the catalyst. It was when she stabs herself and he gets all that blood on him. That's actually when he was fucked, not when he took the drug. The drug is almost like a red herring. And it works here because it makes the movie a lot more interesting, and you kind of don't know where it's going. But it turns out to be an outbreak. And then the woman basically tells her to turn around, and then she shoots herself. And then essentially Julia is left holding, a rifle. And there's this really great camera sequence where, the camera pans up to her. She's walked over to this big window where she's looking out over the city, and you just see explosions and like all this gunfire going off. And then she like turns around, she puts her back to the window and sits down and just starts screaming and crying. And you see all this mayhem continuing to happen in the background. And then the lights just start to systematically go off. And then it's just pitch black behind her as she's continuing to scream and cry. And the scene plays out for about maybe like 2.5 minutes of just the shot of her crying with the gun and all of that going on behind her. And it really sits there and lets that emotion breathe. And it really, really worked for me. By time this movie was over, it felt like I was on some drugs with the characters, like some fucking coke. Like I felt amped. Like this movie is just pure adrenaline from start to finish. There are no metaphors. It's not a thinker of a film. This movie is all about showing you a good fucking time. And I think everyone should watch this movie, because I think it is probably, in my opinion, the most impressive use of this one take kind of gimmick that's going around. This, I think, is the coup de grace. This is the king of the one take from my perspective. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I would love to hear if you think this one take gimmick is overdone. If it doesn't work for you, I want to know why. And again, it doesn't always work for me. But in this film, this is something special. If I had watched this, it came out in 2024. I didn't have a chance to watch it this past year. Had I watched it before I had made my top 5 list of 2024, I think Mads would have cracked the top 5, and I don't think it would have been number 5. It would have been a little bit higher than 5. It was one of the best movies that I've watched in a very long time. So yeah, that is Mads, y'all. So we had a good time. Yeah, we talked about Red Rooms, talked about Dashcam, talked about Mads. We had the monkey staring you down the whole time with his little drum set. There's a lot of good horror coming up. I'm very, very excited for what the future holds for the new Dexter reboot, because I'm proud to say, after the finish of Dexter Original Sin, the reboot that had no right to be as good as it was, for me ended up being one of the best seasons of Dexter, probably my favorite since season 4. I think the first 4 seasons of Dexter are untouchable, but I mean, for Original Sin to deliver the best iteration of Dexter that we've seen since the Trinity Killer, I mean, that is an impressive feat. Patrick Gibson deserves his flowers. I never in a million years thought that he would be able to match Michael C. Hall, but goddamn it, he does it. So next up with Dexter, we have Dexter. What is it? Dexter Resurrection? I guess we're getting into the Friday the 13th era of Dexter. We've reached Resurrection. It's the Jason Lives of Dexter. Yeah, old Tommy Jarvis is going to drive a stake through him. And lightning's going to hit it, and then Dexter's going to wake back up and wreak havoc. But I think what made Original Sin so good was that it was able to shed a lot of the convoluted storylines that kind of overtook Dexter post season 4. So I'm curious if Resurrection's going to be able to carry the momentum of Original Sin, because it's going to have to flash. It's going to have to go back to the end of New Blood, and it's going to have to be placed right back into with all of that canon, convoluted bullshit of some of those later lesser seasons. But got some good casting. I saw Kristen Ritter, Neil Patrick Harris, Peter Dinklage. Like, I mean, it's at the very least we're gonna get to see a lot of good actors lined up for this one. So I'm hoping it's good. It'll always be good to see Michael C. Hall be in Dexter. So at the very least, that'll be nice. The Last of Us 2, I think the trailer drops. I'm filming this now on March 8th. I think the trailer drops today. It's like 3 a.m. on March 8th for me. So, a lot of good horror television coming up. I still don't know what I'm going to review next week, but I think I'm going to stop telling you, because I've noticed I'll be like, oh, I'm going to review these movies, and then something just comes to me, and I end up wanting to review other movies. So you'll find out next week. So tune back in for Gory Hole episode 8, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some kick-ass films, and at the very least, if we talk about bad films, we can find out the films you need to avoid. Yeah. Also, got to give a shout out to my shirt. This is Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso. To, I guess, now technically March 8th. I started recording this on March 7th, but March 7th, 1975, 50 years ago, was the release in Italy for Deep Red, one of my favorite giallos of all time. So you should watch Deep Red. Maybe I'll talk about that next week. Maybe I won't. Who knows? All I know is Deep Red, if you have not seen it, I will leave you with this little fact, that in my opinion, it has one of the best on-screen decapitations of all time. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I think you should just go and experience it. But yeah, if you have honestly run through Argento's catalog, because I mean, if you haven't watched Argento movies, you are missing out. You can watch the dubs if you want, but you should seek out the Italian subtitled ones, because those are the best. But Deep Red is one of his best, and it turned 50. That is crazy to think about, especially because I'm only 28. It's crazy to think about how old these movies are getting. But yeah, y'all have a good gory week. Watch something spooky, watch something scary, and if you watch a movie you want to hear my thoughts on, drop a comment, and I'll take a look at it. Have a good night, y'all.